Hi there, I'm Dan the Radio Man. Thank you very much for joining me for another one of these opinionated videos. And today we're talking about radio, of course, because it's a channel focused on radio. We're talking about the future of radio, and not really commercial radio, more community radio. Just my thoughts on where it might go. I mean, feel free to disagree with me in the comments. This is based on the fact that the Department for Culture, Media and Sport put out a survey towards the end of last year into the new year of 2024, this current year. And they were talking about the future of community radio and asking people to participate and see where the opinion was of where that should go. Now, I shared my opinion through that survey. It's now closed, so you can't do it anymore. But I've been talking to a number of community radio people recently, and it's safe to say that I don't think my opinion is the prevailing force, which is fine. You know, it's all a debate, and it's all good natured as well. But it's important that we debate these things. So let's talk about radio in the UK currently. It's not in the greatest position in terms of market, in terms of jobs. I would say that if you're wanting to get on air, it's exceptionally difficult. It always was exceptionally difficult, but there are less players in the marketplace for you to get a break, which is what I find, and that's the most troubling thing for me, and because that's primarily what I want to do. That's why I kind of got into it, and a lot of people do, and then they discover love for the behind-the-scenes production side of it. And I do love production as well, but I still want to be on air. So let's kind of look at where that is with the cuts a year ago from BBC Local. I say a year ago. It was about 6 months ago, the BBC Local radio cuts, or what feels like a year ago. It's about 6 to 7 months now. We haven't really started to see that from the last radar figures. We started to see it slightly, but the next set of radar figures, they'll be the ones that really indicate what these changes have meant for audiences. But essentially, when the BBC cut their local programming from 6 a.m. to 2 p.m. and then regionalising it afterwards, like Heart does, or Heart did when they decided to cut their local stations, it's really created less opportunity for younger people, or for people that want to get into broadcasting from a non-broadcasting family like myself. I've got no connections to the business, no industry inside knowledge or anything. It's just not possible for me. I'm from an Irish working class family. I have no one in my family wanted to ever be in media apart from me. My sister works for a bank and my father worked for Woolworths. So there you go. I don't think you can get more working class than your dad working for Woolies. I nearly said Woolies, but I meant Woolies. So that kind of started a trend. But of course, we go back to the old days of local radio, of names such as 210 FM, GWR, which was my local station. I absolutely adored that station. I absolutely loved listening to it. And also you get Seven Sounds in Gloucestershire. There are so many names that have gone by the wayside, and of course became the Heart brand through, Global. GCAP Media getting bought out by Global, which was Chrysalis Radio originally, and then that was bought out by Ashley Tabor and his consortium. It was all turned into Heart, and then you had Heart Wiltshire, Heart Gloucestershire, and things like that. And then it became Heart West, and it became much more conglomerated. As I can't really remember why, but it may have been it probably was a cost-cutting exercise. The ad market is not in the healthiest position it's ever been in terms of radio and television. I still believe radio's ad market is much stronger than television, but then radio doesn't have to build streaming services to get people to watch, although they do have to build streaming platforms for audio, although most of those are really built by a minority of companies and they're quite inexpensive to run. And I think with Myriad and Broadcast Radio, BR Live, they actually can provide you an app themselves. So that's just an example of that. They're quite inexpensive to make. In fact, when I first joined my local community station, I created a free streaming app for them. So it was inexpensive. It was very good, but it was inexpensive, and it got us out there. It got us on the marketplace. So, radio is in a much healthier position in terms of its ad market, in my view, than television right now. Although neither is doing very well because the advertising is heading towards social media. But let's talk about the future of community radio. It's an important sector that doesn't get its day in the sun, and it's local radio and community radio it is different things to different people. As I've discovered in my conversations with a number of local stations, and some people like it some way, some people like it another way. A lot of community radio, when it was founded, was basically speech and talking about local stories and local people, and going slightly more in depth than maybe BBC local radio. Now there are stations, and I won't name names, but there are stations that play a lot of music and a little bit of advertising, and that generally is the kind of community radio I like, but it's not necessarily a general view of what community radio should be. So there is a philosophical discussion and a philosophical debate as to what it could be. I mean, you don't really want to chase the almighty dollar or the almighty pound sign, as it might be in the UK. However, these are technically businesses, and I should say that community radio stations are not allowed. They are not allowed to make a profit. I hit my mic. They are not allowed to make a profit, and they operate on a rule of 50% of the revenue can come from advertising, and then 50% can come from other sources such as grants and things like that. Now, for me, when I was filling in this Department for Culture, Media and Sport, because I can't say the initial letters in my brain, the DCMS, there we go. When I was filling out this survey, my overwhelming opinion was, get rid of this 50% advertising rule. Let them take 100% of revenue from advertising. Different stations have different needs, and they have different funding models, of course. I'm being told that grant funding is not as easy to come by certain people. However, I do like the idea that community radio stations can recoup all of the money from local advertising. And I genuinely think that there is a market for it, because like the national brands like Heart, they're much more focused on national brands because they pay the most money, and you're going to know them when you're listening to Heart on DAB or Heart on FM or Heart on the app or whatever. It's same with Greatest Hits, same with the hits. They want national brands, and I feel that though yes, there's a lot of loyalty through heritage, particularly at Global, more than Bauer. Although Bauer have a lot of good local radio stations that they've acquired over the years from the likes of News Corp and UKRD, and like Signal and Pirate, for instance. And of course, they had some local stations such as Wave in Bournemouth. However, by the way, goodbye Wave. I loved that station, by the way. I just see them as wanting national brands because that's who pays the most money. They're the most recognizable, and that's where they get the brand deals. Where it's, look at Chris Evans and his Virgin Radio breakfast show sponsored by Cinch, and it was originally sponsored by Sky. That's two national brands. You're not going to get your local chip shop advertising on Virgin Radio, or Heart, for instance. And I think there's a gap in the market for it. And I suppose the argument against that is that, if I look at my own area of Swindon, it was 7.2 listening hours per person for Heart. It was 115,000 people or akin to that in the last Radar quarterlies. And you're not going to get, in a marketplace of 235,000 people, if half listen to one station, then what are the other half doing? they're not always listening to the radio. However, I think if you can get in people's faces, I think there is still maybe it's naivety, and you can tell me in the comments, but maybe it's naivety, but I think there is still a desire for good local broadcasting. Now, what that entails means different things to different people. For me, growing up with GWR in the early 2000s, it was meeting people from the station at events. You know, they would go out with the GWR Black Thunder, whose cars before they became the Heart Angels, and you know, you'd meet people at events. Sometimes they used to just, you know, bring the car, but a lot of the times you would meet the presenters, and that's what was my initial love for GWR and radio, because I they don't remember meeting me, but I definitely saw them there and at various different events across Swindon when I grew up, and I absolutely loved that. Before I even knew I loved radio, I mean, I did love listening to it, but before I knew I wanted to do it, I see that there is a market for that. I think there is a market, particularly if you've got a big area. So for, you know, maybe big cities with the small scale DAB multiplexes, I think there is a marketplace if you are a big multiplex in a big area for a multiplex. You could really, you know, make that marketplace your own, but stations need to get out in front of people's faces, and you could, you know, there are different business models. Like, look at Boom Radio's business model. They, you know, they have lots of advertising. They're a great station. They work mainly from home. They don't have an actual physical premises. So although you can correct me if I'm wrong on that, but I'm pretty sure they don't have an actual physical premises, that their presenters work from home. And that is a great model for them. They are a national radio brand. That doesn't work for a local radio brand. I think you've got to have a local base. Maybe I'm a little bit old school, but I think you've got to be based locally. And I do like the idea of I'm able to do radio from home, and I love doing that, and I do it on a daily basis. However, I'm the biggest hypocrite in the world when I say I think getting out in front of people's faces is what radio is. And I know I'm a creature of the studio. I really don't enjoy social situations and things like that. However, it is about that, and I do love going to like shopping centers and going to shops and talking to people and opening. I mean, the best thing I've ever done in terms of radio was, and it was completely out of my comfort zone, but I absolutely loved it. There was a music festival in Swindon at Lydiard Park called M4 Festival, and I went and presented with a fellow DJ on the local community station, Howard Taylor, former GWR presenter. Hello, Howard. And because he was the breakfast presenter and I was a drive presenter. And I never thought for a million years that I would present alongside Howard Taylor. I loved it. It was a real geeky moment for me. It was a real surreal moment as well. And I loved that. You know, I was a bit hesitant at first because it's not my ballpark, but you know what? I fell in love with it and I absolutely enjoyed it. And I think there is a marketplace for that still. And if this 50% rule is gone, I think it unlocks enormous potential for community radio stations. However, I understand the argument that, you know, they shouldn't be servants to the mighty pound. Like, they shouldn't just exist for commercial gain. And I understand that but the way I see it is you've either got two options. And some community radio stations, if that model of 100% of ad revenue was kept, can be taken over by private entities and turned into basically commercial radio stations. That's not what I'm preaching. What I'm preaching is, and maybe it's a battle for the soul of community radio, is either community interest companies, CICs, that don't make money but do bring money in and then they spend it elsewhere. So there's nothing stopping a radio station from bringing in a lot of money and then spending that on their own events. There is nothing in Ofcom's rules to say that you cannot pay your talent. And that's the real concern for me, but I'll go to that in a bit. I'll tackle that issue in a bit. Or you can do, and I don't think this has ever been done before, but I think it's a great idea, is if you are someone that knows the business and you've got a group of people collectively, because I think collectivization is the future of just business in general, not just in media, but in business with the state of the current economy. I think a cooperative-owned radio station, a cooperative-owned commercial community station could work, and it's something I'm very much passionate about and something I'm very much looking into, a cooperative community radio station or a cooperative commercial station that does community things. I think with the rise of small-scale DAB, I think that's a real possibility, and I think that could genuinely, I think that could happen. But it goes back to the point of there are two fundamental issues now with radio. And the fundamental issues that I have with it are, I question where the talent is going to come from. And yes, the cream will always rise to the top. However, it does help if you have a leg up. And I'm sure not every celebrity's sons or daughters will want to do radio, but that kind of feels like where they're all coming from, or they get TV presenters to do it. And I don't want to sound like this, but there is an art to it. There's an art to it. So where's the future talent pool coming from? Because it sure as hell is not coming from the BBC anymore. I was taught by a lecturer that BBC trains you, commercial pays you. And I think we're starting to see less and less of that now. So where are those opportunities coming from? Well, they're coming from community radio and volunteer radio. The problem is that the type of people that can volunteer their time to radio are generally quite affluent people. You're going to struggle to get properly working class people in radio that are young, unless they've worked their lives and are just doing this as a hobby. For someone like me, this is not a hobby. This was a full-on choice to explore this medium, and I absolutely love it, and it is an absolute addiction of mine. However, where's the money? Should community radio pay their talent? That is a question I will leave for you. I know what my opinion is on that, but I will leave that for you. Is there going to be a new wave of semi-commercial community radio stations, or a new wave of commercial stations? Is radio about to experience another boom period, potentially, with the rise of small-scale DAB? I always predicted that it would. However, I don't know for sure. I hope I'm right for the sake of the business, and I hope for the sake of talent as well. But we may have to look at different business models to get radio to where it needs to be, because it's not all about selling an app, selling ads, and sometimes it's about talking to people, and sometimes it's about listening to people, and sometimes it's just about playing some really good music in your local area and talking about things that happen round the corner from you, and that is just excellent radio. I have been Danny Harrington. This is the Dan the Radio Man YouTube channel. Don't forget to check out my On the Air podcast. I have various different guests from different stations talking about themselves. I interview them and they talk about their connection with radio, how they got started, their journey through the industry. You can check that out on Spotify, Amazon, Apple, and various other music streaming services as well. And you can watch it here on YouTube too. Thank you so much for watching. I will see you next time. Bye-bye.